This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
So I'll just start by giving a brief summary. This is the epilogue to a novel, and it's narrated in the first person. And the narrator she's setting a scene that seems kind of one of the perfect kind of domestic setup. So she wakes up early, she leaves a male and a child sleeping upstairs, moves downstairs, makes herself a cup of coffee, goes to sit at the desk that this named male has built for her so that she has somewhere to work in the kitchen. She then does a little bit of work. Then she hears the upstairs door to the bedroom open, and her daughter comes down the stairs. And the daughter says to her, "Where?" Just the word "where." And so first of all, the narrator thinks she's talking about the cat. So she says, "The cat's over there." And the daughter says again, "Where?" And it's obvious she wasn't talking about the cat. And then the extract ends, and the novel ends with the narrator picking up her daughter in her arms, and they go and look out of the window, and it finishes with just because it's only short. So the daughter again says, "Where?" She repeats. "I lift her up in my arms and we walk over to the big window with our faces together. Far away," I tell her. "We can't see because of the fog beyond." She makes a careful circular gesture with her hand as if she wants to investigate all of it and take it all in. So that's how the novel ends. So to begin with, it does seem like it's, quite a kind of rosy vision of domestic life. And I have to say, when I first read it before the workshop, I did think, I can't see that there's that much to say about it. And that was why I think it was a really, that's why I think it was a really good choice, because it made us work very hard. And because in a way it does seem, like she is painting this very rosy vision. So we did work quite hard, and we tried to kind of draw out some of the ambiguities and the more kind of interesting aspects of it. And actually, one of the things, so I'll focus kind of first of all what we were saying about the extract itself, and then how the discussion broadened. So one quite interesting part in the text, which was quite revealing, I think, was particularly where this daughter is asking this question again, where? And the mother never really seems to know what she's asking. It's a very broad question. And the first, and we were thinking it actually tells you something about motherhood, how you don't always know what your children are asking for. And it said something about the process of, there's a lot of guesswork, and how you're often giving answers that to a question you don't really understand, or you don't know exactly, but there is this sense that as the mother you do have to be giving answers, and that was quite interesting. So at first she thinks the daughter's talking about the cat, but then she has to try again, and then people were kind of reflecting on what they thought this "where" might mean, and what they thought the mother or the narrator might thought it meant, if that makes sense. So then we learned from Maria Jose that actually earlier in the novel, or the beginning of the novel, we find that the narrator's mother has died, and most of the novel is in fact about that. So at the beginning of the novel, correct me if I'm wrong because I haven't read it, but at the beginning of the novel, the narrator's mother has died, but she also says that she never wants to become pregnant. She's completely anti becoming a mother. And then at the end of the main section of the novel, there's a line, I think she's fallen in love, and she says, "That night I became pregnant." The novel ends, and then we move to this epilogue where she's got a daughter. So kind of learning more about the novel, then people started to speculate about how the narrator was interpreting this question of her daughter, and perhaps almost kind of reading into the daughter's question things that her own questions, or what's kind of in her own mind. So we were thinking along those lines, which took us there was another point actually where so she's made her coffee and she sits down to work at the desk that her seemingly perfect male partner has built for her to do her work while she cooks. And she reads, so she's reading this report about a prisoner who, so the prisoner is trying to portray himself as insane, but his, I don't know, is it a lawyer, or we don't know in the text, but doesn't think he is, so to kind of call his bluff, chains his feet. And so we have this quite kind of horrible image in a prison. So we have this woman kind of go down, and she makes her lovely hot pot of coffee, sits down, and then we have this kind of complete contrast with the world that is her research, that she's immersing herself in, and then we break to her scene with her daughter. So we're thinking that kind of reveals something about how you're kind of moving in between different worlds and how they kind of collide, and you have to inhabit them all at the same time, but also move between them. So that was kind of what we got from talking about the text, but then as we kept kind of finding ourselves asking more questions about the novel as a whole. And one of the interesting themes was how the narrator is dealing with the death of her mother, and how there's an interesting, I mean, I'm just basing this on what you've said about it because obviously I haven't read it, but how at the beginning of the book the narrator's mother has died, and the narrator goes to visit her grandfather in an old people's home, a hospital, an old people's home, and the doctor suggests that she pretends to be her mother. Okay, so we've got grandfather, mother, narrator. The narrator's mother's died, and it's suggested that she visits the grandfather as her mother. And so we have this kind of theme of her impersonating the mother, and how that's a way of struggling to cope with grief. And this was what I found the most interesting part of the discussion, which was that as we were trying to kind of work out what the symbolism was, or we were trying to, get a bit deeper into the text, we kept asking questions about the author. So we, wanted to know lots of questions about the author. And one of the interesting facts about the author is that she had 2 children who died, one aged 18 months and one aged 29. And that made us then go back to the text with a really different kind of set of tools to work with in a way. And so then we were thinking, well, is she trying to kind of bring through the narrator's voice, is she trying to kind of bring back her daughter that she's lost in some way, because the narrator's about the same age that the daughter was when she died. And we also have this young child who's 1.5 years old, which is the same age as her first child who died. And so we were kind of talking about how this is something that literature can do, is actually help people give voices and change the order of things, not only bringing people back to life, but continuing stories that have finished. And so we were talking, in a way that's one of the things that literature is unique in being able to do. But then we became a bit more self-reflective, and we're kind of questioning, to what extent we can treat these kind of texts as reflections of the author's own life, and that there's a danger in reading kind of fictional novels as autobiographical. And people were saying that that's particularly a danger with women's writing, is that often a woman's novel will be read as just a reflection of her own life, and it's a way of denigrating it or reducing. So I found that really, really interesting, because I'm not from a literature background, And I was saying it's quite different because I'm from philosophy. And it's almost the opposite problem with philosophy, where we treat these texts as if nobody, nobody wrote them, as if they just kind of materialised out of thin air and there wasn't an embodied person with a partial perspective who wrote these texts. Whereas actually perhaps in literature there's the opposite problem, is that there's too much of a tendency to reduce them to the reflection of just the author. So I thought that was quite an interesting point for the kind of interdisciplinary discussion, is how do we treat those texts, and how do we treat also the characters in the text? Are we treating them as, because we kind of tend to treat them as kind of embodiments of a certain kind of psychic state or approach, and so I thought that was interesting. And the final question that I thought was interesting that we discussed was, somebody said to Maria Jose, do you think this is a feminist novel? So we had just a small question, but so we had quite a nice discussion about what makes a novel feminist, the difference between women's writing and feminist writing, feminist approaches, ways of reading the text as a feminist text or a woman's text as a feminist. And I don't know if Deborah's still here, but she was talking this morning about the importance of being clear about when we're talking about women, when we're talking about mothers, when we're talking about feminist, and how we, all these kind of different identities and roles and subject positions can all get a little bit conflated. So I thought that was a really interesting way to finish the discussion. I think it's hard, isn't it? But I think that about covers it.